Here's the question probably nobody asked today. What is the hardest Souls game? Well, none to me, peasant. What do you expect I will struggle in a Souls game? Outright blasphemy. Wait, that wasn't in the script, right? Right? Oh. Last week we talked about the strongest protagonist. That was easy. Each character has enough lore to write an entire book. So, objective lists are baby difficulty in video making. Sadly, it is not the case with this one. Each game has super easy and some difficult moments. Based on your playstyle, you may suffer in one game while you blast through the other one. Dex builds are fine and acceptable in Elden Ring, but if you dare to level it in Dark Souls 1, know that I'm in your walls. So how do we measure the difficulty? Do we consider the complexity of boss fights? Well, if that's the case, then Elden Ring and Sekiro has the absolute highest difficulty when you put them side by side with Dark Souls 2. But oh well, if we're thinking about the hardest game at Soul level 1, then it's the opposite. Elden Ring has the easiest level 1 gameplay, while Dark Souls 2 without a doubt has the hardest. I have thousands of hours in each title, and in terms of difficulty I'm probably out of touch at this point, so I will talk about the overall difficulty. If the majority of the game is easy, then having an incredibly difficult last bit won't contribute to the overall challenge. I will consider how viable different playstyles are, how many different options you have for each obstacle, and straight up how easy or difficult encounters are. Make sure to stick till the end of the video because the top 2 games in the list will change your life. No, it won't. I'm lying. I don't know why I said that. Let's go! Starting with the easiest. Would you look at that? It's Demon Souls again. It's almost like there's a pattern I'm following. Alright, no Souls game is truly difficult when you've been playing these games before those people telling you to get God were even born. So, straight to the point, Demon Souls isn't as complex as the newer games, and the damage received is much lower in this title, but what are the mechanics that were meant to make this game difficult? So you have the classic penalty of dropping souls. Okay, good, but every other Souls game also has it. What else? Losing half of your health anytime you are beaten in combat. Okay, but it's not a big deal. There's a ring reducing the health reduction. I know, it is the healing system, but that's actually a double-edged sword. If you're reckless and you run out of moongrass, you put yourself in rather dissatisfying situation. You resurrect with half health and 0 healings. So this instantly makes the game more strategic, but farming is easy, and having an abysmal amount of extra healing in your pocket defeats most of the challenge game offers. Boss fights are often creative and fun. Most encounters have special trick to cripple the bosses, and naturally once you figure out the obvious trick behind each boss, like a blob of slime being weak to fire and a blind dude being sensitive to sound, fights become much easier. I believe Demon Souls has the overall easiest bosses compared to the other games. What truly offers a bit of difficulty in Demon Souls is the level design and runbacks. Often, distance between unlockable shortcuts and bonfires are too far, and enemy placement is more dense than some of the other Souls games. So, game becomes a strategic resource manager anytime you explore. It is actually quite fun and refreshing. What's not fun is the runbacks. You better not be failing in those boss fights, because the run back to the boss is, oh my, like Storm King, Tower Knight, Gargoyles. Come on, dude. You don't want to experience that run back more than 2 times. Demon Souls isn't straight up an easy game, but it is, at least to me, the easiest one in the franchise. You can access to too many healing items, you can cheese most bosses, and you can obtain some really powerful weapons quite early in the game. If you're a new Souls player, of course you can have trouble with some of the mechanics, but still, it's not as difficult as the others. On to the next one. Dark Souls 1 has its difficult moments, like leaving this room is so difficult for some reason, I don't know. It always takes me at least 20 minutes to finally get out of this room, and I have no idea why the binoculars are keep reappearing in my hands like... Anyway, alright, there are difficult moments like Manus is genuinely a terrifying boss. Some moves are difficult to see, some moves are difficult to dodge. Some runbacks can be quite exhausting, like Bed of Chaos and Seed the Scaleless. And there are so many fun, challenging areas like Anol on the Ceilings, Sand Fortress, and Nivell on the Ruins. Overall, Dark Souls 1 is a mostly well-balanced experience. keyword here is mostly though. Places like Blighttown can be quite challenging, but it isn't really all that bad. On your first playthrough, you will most likely respawn at that previous bonfire like 100 times, but the game rarely has these difficult areas. Mostly in each section you will face widespread and properly balanced enemies, except all the time you get ganked by rats and flame-spitting dogs and skeletons, and I don't know. Thankfully, Dark Souls 1 gives a lot of different tools to players so that they can overcome the earlier part of the game. You can grab Zweihander, or you can even shoot a dragon from distance for 5 minutes and grab Drakesword. There's Blackfire Bomb to obliterate all the early game demons, and you can almost double your early damage with Gold Pine Resin. When it comes to Dark Souls 1 bosses, almost all of them are so iconic for good and bad reasons, but I can't really think of a lot of difficult bosses. Quelag, Nito, Seed, even Four Kings can be easily avoided by spacing. You don't even need to dodge, and most of the time all you need to do is move left or right and hit the boss anytime you're on the flanks. Being one of the oldest Souls titles, Dark Souls bosses, despite having amazing lore and design, can't really keep up with a modern Souls player's experience. Then again, bosses such as Calamite, Manus, Ornstein and Smaug still hold up pretty well. Apart from some difficult locations and occasional difficult bosses, Dark Souls 1 isn't really as difficult as the other ones in the list. Some games have difficult areas, some games have difficult bosses, some a bit of everything. Dark Souls 3 on the other hand, despite having its own difficulties, isn't really up there with the others in terms of consistent difficulty. Usually enemy placement is more forgiving than most of the other games, and right from the start you can become incredibly powerful. You can grab a lot of souls from Gundyr, Crystal Lizard on steroids and Naked Samurai Dude, and what do you do with all the souls? Well, you put them all into Vigor, because in the early game your damage won't come from stats. You upgrade your weapon with all the free resources you find in the beginning area, and would you look at that, you can nuke the first boss without even pressing the dodge button. And this continues until you are way deep into the game. Locations often have easy to deal with enemies, and the bosses don't really put up a good fight in the first half of the game. In High Wall of Lothric, as a new player you could run out of healing, and you can be forced to return to Bonfire a couple times, but at the end Ward is an easy boss. Same goes with Undead Settlement, Road of Sacrifices, Cathedral of the Deep and Ferengi. Probably the first slightly challenging boss in the game is Abyss Watchers, and then game cranks up the difficulty with Iritil of the Boreal Valley and Pontiff Saliban. I can say like 90% of the bosses are so much fun and well designed, but up until endgame you don't really feel the difficulty. Regular enemies can be dealt with by spamming. They are also properly placed so the game doesn't frustrate you with annoying enemy spam. Dark Souls 3 is a really well balanced game that becomes progressively more and more difficult as you go through. If we talk about the endgame alone, with Nameless King, Sister Frida, Meteor Gale, and areas such as Painted World of Ariandel, Ring City, Archdragon Peak and Irisel Dungeon, Dark Souls 3 is definitely in the top 3 most difficult in the franchise. But the well-designed, beginner-friendly early and mid-game makes Dark Souls 3 slightly easier than the others. Oh boy, Elden Ring is difficult to talk about, but it's not the part of the difficulty metric, of course. Elden Ring, without a doubt, has some of the most difficult bosses in Souls franchise. I mean, Prime Consort Radahn, hello, Malenia, Malekith, Twin Gargoyles. Bosses can be difficult, but why is Elden Ring so low on the list then? Well, there are a couple reasons. So first I will talk about what makes this game easy, and then we talk about what makes it difficult. Elden Ring, without a doubt, is the most beginner-friendly Souls game to this day. Right when you start the game, you have an entire world ahead of you. Margit is too difficult to beat at your current level? Well, why are you even there, my dude? You can go back, explore 15 or so dungeons in Limgrave, you can beat 31 other smaller bosses, and if you're still struggling, you can bypass Stormrail Castle and explore a bunch more other locations. Liurnia, Caelid, just go and clear simpler places, earn a lot of runes and upgrade materials, and then go back to where you were stuck. Elden Ring gives you the option to pick your own difficulty slider. You can beat Margit at level 1, or you can come back to him with a plus 20 weapon. And this is the case for almost the entire game. Long story short, anytime you're stuck somewhere, you have the option to go and explore a different location. Another thing that makes Elden Ring slightly easier is the variety and the tools. Good part about this game is you can enjoy it however you want. I like running this game at level 1 and memorizing each boss's moveset, but hey, if you enjoy playing the game with Spirit unlimited summons, and heaviest armors you can find, along with Scarlet Rot setup, guess what? Your playthrough is just as valid as mine. In the end, we both beat the same bosses the way we enjoy, and of course in the end we both sit on the same throne, we both watch the same credits. So Elden Ring gives you the option to make the game as easy as you want. I mean, each game does that to an extent, but Elden Ring gives you the most options. Now, what makes Elden Ring more difficult than the games before? Bosses have more moveset than ever. Delayed attacks, quick attacks, annoying attacks, and attacks that will age you by 10 years because of how stressful the timing is. Another sweet difficulty slider is the enemies. In all the Souls games, you rarely see elite enemies. In Dark Souls 3, you see a Black Knight once every 5 hours. Dark Souls 1 barely has elite enemies, but it is not the case with Elden. Each area comes with pack of elites. Stormveil Castle has banished knights. Castle Sol has banished knights. Caelid has banished knights. Crumbling Pharaoh Mazula has banished knights. Wait, this isn't a good look. Forget about the banished knights. There are Royal Revenants, Cleanrot Knights, Rune Bears. You get the point. On top of regular enemies, each zone comes with slightly stronger fun enemy types to keep the exploration entertaining. Overall, Elden Ring is a player-friendly game with so many viable tools allowing you to reduce the difficulty. But also, game has some bosses and locations that are more complex and difficult than any other Souls game. Alright, next game. To be honest with you, most of Dark Souls 2's difficulty comes from bad game design. I love this game so much and I think it does a lot of things better than the others, but most of its flaws show themselves in difficulty design. It's not that game itself is difficult, but the clunky movement and lazy enemy placement makes it a bit frustrating. I prefer complex bosses like Malekith over a boss such as Duke's Dear Freya, where all the difficulty comes from a bunch of tiny spiders next to a simple boss. Now, Dark Souls 2 bosses are often slow, even slower than Dark Souls 1 bosses, but so are you. In this game, your roll dodges barely have any iframes. Dodging is often more difficult and painful. If you don't pay attention, you will get hit by something halfway through your dodge. And what do you do to fix it? You level your adaptability to have more iframes. But even then, dodging still doesn't feel satisfying. But the real difficulty of Dark Souls 2 comes from the area design. Distances between bonfires are long, areas are massive, and they are always packed with unnecessary amount of enemies. Anytime you turn the corner, there's a good chance you will be jumped by an entire gang. It is similar to Demon's Souls, but much worse in this title. Oh, and did I mention the terrible directional attacks? I swear, your character will try to miss attacks on purpose to mess with you. If you dodge behind an enemy and attack right away, your character won't think of facing the enemy before the attack animation starts. If Dark Souls 2's movement was anything close to Dark Souls 1 or 3, this could become the easiest Souls game. However, lack of iframes, bad directional attacks, clunky animations, and overly populated world map makes Dark Souls 2 tiny bit more difficult than the others. But once you know how to deal with the problems, game is so much fun to play through over and over again. Bloodborne is without a doubt one of the best games ever made in Souls genre, but how does it approach the difficulty design? Overall, Bloodborne comes with a more complex area design than most of the other games on the list. Each location is densely packed and there are so many different challenging enemies. While games like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring try to make early game as easy as possible, this works a bit different in Bloodborne. In every corner there are packs of enemies waiting to land a lucky hit, and on top of that you don't have the traditional Estus Flask system. Healing is similar to Demon's Souls with some proper limitations this time, which means anytime you hit the ground you wake up with whatever healings you have remaining. Exploration becomes quite difficult when you don't have room to make mistakes. You can't stack defensive stats on top of each other, you can't put on a heavy armor and slap a tower shield on top of it. Bloodborne has two defensive mechanics. You either dash at the correct time or you try to recover a bit of your lost health by attacking back. Either way, in Bloodborne's combat there's no room for slowing down. You have to constantly stay in action and push the bosses. Lack of defensive utility combined with fast and aggressive bosses create an incredibly fun combat experience. Bloodborne keeps a relatively well-balanced difficulty throughout the game without having random spikes. With little room to make mistake and aggressive gameplay, Bloodborne comes with a difficult but rewarding gameplay. I have mixed feelings about Sekiro. On my first ever playthrough, Sekiro felt like the most difficult Souls game I have ever played, and then as I got better, it turned into the easiest Souls game for me. That's when I started playing with the intended difficulty with Demon Bell and Kuro's Charm. Unlike Elden Ring, or actually, unlike any other Souls-like, your adventure is tightly scripted and planned. Game is more linear than any other, but of course this isn't a bad thing. In Sekiro, you have a single weapon, some prosthetic tools, and combat arts. Areas you can visit are limited, you can't travel to the endgame locations without beating the previous areas. Oh, and did I mention there's also no leveling in this game? So, locations you can visit, bosses and enemies you can fight, the power level you have are all balanced and handcrafted. You will only fight the bosses intended way, you will only experience areas you are allowed to. Once again, being a linear game is not a bad thing when the game design is as flawless as Sekiro's design. In Sekiro, until you beat the boss ahead of you, you can't continue. You have to learn boss patterns in order to progress in the game. Difficult bosses combined with balanced player stats means you can never over-level and cheese bosses with your stats. Game also comes with difficulty sliders. If you remove Kuro's Charm, you take 30% more damage, you lose health unless you perfect block, you take more posture damage, and you get faster status build up on negative effects. Game becomes much more difficult, but it doesn't even end there. Once you ring the Demon Bell, everything does more damage and takes less damage even further. While fighting an endgame boss, you have to keep up with the rhythm. You have to dodge, you have to jump, you have to Mikiri counter as much as you have to deflect attacks. Sekiro has the most action-packed combat in the franchise, on top of some of the most challenging bosses and difficult mechanics. As you master the game, it becomes much easier, but game's overall difficulty stays relative from start to finish. So, in my opinion, Sekiro is the most difficult Souls game. Well, this was it. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you disliked it, go ahead and hit the thumbs down. Let me know in the comments how would you rank each game, and thanks a lot for watching. I will see you on the next one. Bye.